right, very quickly. I had you read that section in your book because being able to take decimals and being able to take fractions, look at them together at the same time, and comparing them in order on a number line is going to be extremely important. Okay? Because once we get familiar with taking those fractions and those decimals and looking at them as a mixture and putting them on number lines that are broken into tenths, so each of our number lines is going to be broken into tenths, then they're going to go back and they're going to say, okay, but what if our number line is broken into fourths? What if it's broken into 12ths or 16ths? So I have to be able to understand what those numbers mean in order to be able to do that. Okay? So, very quickly, let's have a quick discussion. If I have a number line, and when it says it's broken into tenths, okay? That means between 0 and 1, I have 10 marks that are equally spaced. Okay, so here's my 0. Because I know a decimal and a fraction both represent what? A decimal and a fraction represent, not always the same, a portion or part of a whole. Now if I have a mixed number, that's a whole and a part. Or if I have a decimal and a whole number with a decimal, that's a whole and a part. Okay? So today I'm just looking mostly at those fractions and decimals that have no mixed numbers. Okay? They'll have no whole numbers. So they're all going to be between 0 and 1. Okay? So here's 0 and here's 1. If I'm breaking this number line into tenths, I'm going to have 9 little dashes. So here would be 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths, 6 tenths, 7 tenths, 8 tenths. I'm going to move this down just a hair. 9 tenths. Here's 10 tenths, which is equivalent to or equal to 1. Do we understand that? If I have a number over itself, like for instance 7 over 7, you understand that 7 over 7 is always equal to 1 whole. If I have 13 over 13, it's always equal to what? 1 whole. 1 whole. Okay? So, if I were to label this chart, let me see if I got a fine tip marker up here. If I were to label my graph here, how do I know that this is broken into tenths? What if I had no idea? How could I figure this out? Allie, how do you think I could figure this out? If I didn't know how many parts this was broken into, how could I figure it out? I could count them. Okay? So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 marks gets me to my first whole number. That tells me that it's broken into tenths. If it was 8 marks that got me all the way to that first number, it would be eighths, right? We know how to write 1/10 as a fraction, don't we? If I told you this mark right here is 1/10, how would I write 1/10 as a fraction? Elliot? 1 over 10. How would I write 1/10 as a decimal, Gabe? Yeah, and 1 or 0.1. Okay? So what you have to understand, that first line, I could write that as 1 over 10 as a fraction, or I could write it as 0.1. I know some of you are like, okay, yeah, I've known this for a while. Okay, that's fine, but it's not going to ever hurt you to hear it again. Okay, so if this is 1/10, this is 2/10, right? Notice I'm marking the spot right where my lines cross. Okay, I'm not in this space right now. I'm going right where those lines cross. Super important. Okay, how would I write 2/10, Leslie? I just want you to tell me, how would I write 2/10 as a fraction or a decimal? Yep. Okay, so I could write it as 2 over 10. How else could I write it, Caleb B? Or 0.2, yeah. Okay, so this one would be, I could write that as 0.3 or 3 over 10, right? Okay, this one would be 0.4 or 4 over 10. Okay, this would be 0.5 or 5 over 10. 0.6 or 6 over 10. 0.7 or 7 over 10. 0.8 or 8 over 10. 0.9 or 9 over 10. Okay, so I can write 10 as 10 over 10. Can I write that as a decimal? No. It would just be 1.0 because now I'm at that whole number. Okay, and every single whole number always has that decimal that could be put behind it. It's kind of imaginary. It's not there. We don't write it unless we need it. Okay, so if I wrote the number 67, technically there is an imaginary, I like to call it imaginary, decimal that would come after the whole number. We don't write it because it's not necessary. Okay, unless I have a part that follows. Does that make sense? Okay, so then the other thing the top part of this book page is telling you is, okay, so we understand each of these marks and we all think that we could label a number line broken into tenths, right? Okay, so if I asked you to put a dot on 5/10, how many of you think you could do that? If I asked you to put a dot on 5/10, mark 5/10 on this number line. All I would have to do is come up here and count 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's 5/10. Put a dot there. If I said come up and mark 9/10, who thinks they could do that? Okay, so we could all mark 9/10. Okay. Now let me do a much neater little timeline here. Not timeline. What are they called? They're called number lines. Okay. Again, here's my 0. 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, 10/10. There's my 1. Okay. What if I came to you and I said, I have a decimal that looks like this. Okay. How many of you know where to plot 0.25? There's no line for 0.25. Is there? No. Okay, so what I have to do, and what you can do, look at the number that is in your tenths place. It's a 2. Go ahead and write that again right above it and put a 0 with it. Okay? Then go one digit that's bigger. Okay? You can tell me where 0.20 is, or 2/10. Okay? You all realize that 0.20 is the same thing as 0.2, right? I can take that 0 off and it does not change my answer. Okay? So all I'm doing is I'm getting the 10th below it and the 10th above it. Okay? So 2/10 would be less than 0.25, but 3/10 would be more than. So when I go to plot this point, 0.25, I have to go more than 2/10, but less than 3/10. Okay? And if I look here, this is 1/10, this is 2/10. Okay, here's my 2/10. Here's my 3/10. If I was going to plot 0.25, it would be about halfway in between those. So about right here is where I would plot 0.25. Okay? And typically I would just put a little dot there. Okay, so I would put a little dot there and I would label it 0.25. Okay, what if I had one that said 0.65? Okay, what is the tenth that would be less than 0.65? That would be 0.7, or 7/10 would be more than 0.65. What's the one that would be less than? 0.6. find 6. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here's 6/10. Here's 7/10. 0.65 is going to go right in the middle, and I would label it 0.65. Okay? What if I had 0.87? What do you think, Elliot? Okay, because 8/10 would be the less than, and 9/10 would be more than. Okay, and 87 is closer to the 9 than it is to 8, right? Yeah. So I'm going to go find my 8 and 9/10. Well, here's 7, 8. So here's my 8/10 and my 9/10. 0.87 is going to go somewhere in the middle, more towards the 9 than the 8. Okay? Good? All right. Very quickly, and then I know DI has to leave. So my last question for you is, what if I'm given a mixture of fractions and decimals, but I have to plot them all on the same number line? Okay? So what if I give you 0.6, I give you 3/5, and I give you 0.15? Okay? I know how to convert that fraction to a decimal. That's step number 1. How do I convert 3/5 to a decimal? Whoops, I gave you 2 that are the same. My bad. How do I do that, Hayden? I could take 3 and divide it by 5. Okay? And if I did that, add my decimal point and my 0, decimal point comes up in the answer. 3 goes... If I would do this the right way, here I am setting a bad example. 3 goes into, or 5 goes into 30, how many times? 6 times. Giving me 30, subtract, I get 0. So 3/5 is equal to 0.6. See what I mean? I gave you the same one twice. Okay? Then I'm going to break this into tenths. Here's 1/10, 2/10, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here's 10/10, which is equivalent to 1. Okay, where would 0.6 go? Tell me verbally. Chloe, where would 0.6 go? On what line? The 6th line. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, if these were labeled A, B, and C, I would put A and B. Okay, because they're both 0.6. If they were labeled with letters that went with them. How would I plot 0.15? Tell me what 2 numbers it would be between, Gabe. Keely? Yeah, or 0.1 and 0.2, right? Okay, here's 0.1, here's 0.2, there's 0.15. 0.1, 0.2. Okay? All right, we will pause right there. I will meet with any of you who want to be met with in just a moment, but I need to get DI out the door.